Hello, Lauren. You're back from Morocco where you were climbing. That's pretty rad.
I'm back. I'm happy to be back. It was an amazing trip, but a little intense. And yeah, excited to be back in California for a little while now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. It was really cool. Fitz, I have a question for you today.
Okay.
How long have you been climbing?
Oh, let's see. I think it has been 27 years, which is crazy to do the math because it feels almost like yesterday because I can kind of remember those years very, very well.
And so I guess we can say, objectively, that you've been in the climbing scene for a while.
Are you calling me old? What's up with this?
No, you're experienced.
Experienced. Yeah.
And so being, though, in the climbing scene for 27 years, you've seen a lot of climbers kind of come and go from the scene. And a lot of them have made a mark, and some of those marks were brief and fleeting and exciting. And then there's other climbers that have seemed to really stay at the top of their game and to stay like a big figure in the climbing scene for a while.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's totally true. And I've seen that in so many of the sports that we cover on the Dirtbag Diaries too, is that there are people that do, that just, it burns super hot, super bright, and they, you kind of hear about them a lot for a few years and they sort of go away. And then there's the people that really, they make a deep contribution to whatever they're passionate about, and they learn how to evolve, they learn how to change, and they grow as people and as athletes with the sport, and they evolve alongside it. It's really cool.
Yeah. Are there folks that come to mind for you when you think of those people that have, really made a kind of lasting impression on the sport?
Yeah, so in terms of climbing, I think there are, especially from my generation, I think there's been a few people that have really led the way. And we're going to talk to one of them today, Beth Rodden. I think she's at the top of that list of somebody who's really made a huge impact on the sport in terms of how they pushed it. I mean, some of what she climbed on El Cap was groundbreaking, and even 20 years later hasn't been done. She climbed a very famous route that's just a short, single, wickedly hard pitch called Meltdown, which was the hardest trad line in the country. And I mean, some of the strongest climbers in the world came to repeat that and couldn't for a long time. And there's that side of her athletic accomplishments, but I think the bigger thing of what Beth has done is she's just been this leader, and she's been willing to have some of the harder conversations our community needed to have about equal pay for women, about how we support mothers and parents, disordered eating in high-end climbing. And it's helped. I don't know how to say it, is that it's like her sort of willingness to have difficult conversations and lead on that front has improved our industry and our community because of that. And I respect the heck out of her for that. So I'm psyched to talk to her today.
Beth talks a lot about all of these things that you've mentioned in her new memoir. It's called A Light Through the Cracks. Fitz, you got a chance to check out the book and talk to Beth about it.
Yeah, it's an incredible read. It's raw, it's vulnerable, it's honest, and it's pretty incredible. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear it. I'm Lauren Delaney Miller.
I'm Fitz Cahal, and you're listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. A Light Through the Cracks begins in the aftermath of your expedition to Kyrgyzstan and your kidnapping and subsequent escape. And I know there's a 3-minute version of that story, that expedition, that I imagine you've told hundreds of times at this stage. Would you mind sharing that version of the story, the quick version, for us?
Yeah, totally. So the quick version of Kyrgyzstan is in summer of 2000. I went on a climbing expedition with my boyfriend at the time, Tommy Caldwell, and 2 of our really good friends, John Dickey and Jason Smith. And we went on a trip to the Karasu Valley in Kyrgyzstan. And back then, the Aksu Valley, the neighboring valley, was kind of like the little bit more known destination for climbers. But we wanted to, go to a summertime big wall free climbing destination. And, there's only so many of those in the world. So to get it funded, we needed something slightly different. So we picked the neighboring Karasu Valley. And when we got there, it was, everything we'd hoped for and more. It was everything we'd seen in pictures and talked to friends about. It was basically like a high alpine Yosemite Valley with these, massive granite walls flanking each side of the valley. And at the back of the valley, it was these snow-capped mountains and this, rushing glacial river going down the middle of it. And so we spent our first couple weeks, doing what climbers do, wandering around, dreaming up objectives. And after a couple weeks, we were on one of our first objectives, not something super big or noteworthy, but we thought it'd be fun to try. So after the first night on the wall, we woke up to these really loud bangs. As climbers, you kind of prepare for stuff that could happen. So we immediately thought it was rockfall. And so we all sat up in our porter ledges and our sleeping bags, and we plastered ourselves to the wall to kind of make ourselves as low profile as possible in case it happened again. And then when it happened again, we looked down to the ground and we saw these armed men shooting up at us. And I was newly 20 at the time. And so kind of the contrast that was happening inside my body, the night before I was kind of my chest was puffed up and I felt like I was winning in life. Here I was, this 20-year-old kid that was living her life. Basically my dreams that I saw in climbing posters on my wall my whole life. And I thought I was so much better than my school friends that were stuck in college, fluorescent lit classrooms. And then all of a sudden I just had this terror inside me, all these questions, why are we here? What's happening? And so it was really apparent that we had to rappel down, and we all rappelled down. And it was very clear when we got there that they were taking us hostage. And so they marched us back to our camp where there were more captors. There was another hostage who was a member of the Kyrgyzstan military. And for the next 6 days, they kind of just marched us around the mountains. We didn't really understand why they had taken us. We just kept guessing that running across 4 Americans was probably a really good opportunity for them. In the beginning of those 6 days, we went through this really massive battle between the Kyrgyzstan military and the rebels, where there were mortars being shot, people were dying. And so it was kind of this really terrifying ordeal for a handful of days. And then on the 6th night of our captivity, we managed to escape. And once we escaped, we went from kind of one ramshackle military outpost to another one, and finally to the United States Embassy in the capital of Kyrgyzstan in Bishkek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that there are the versions of events in our lives, and we condense them down into something manageable, something consumable. And I think it's particularly true for the difficult things that happen to us. With those difficult things, we do it to survive, to not take up too much space, to not be too much of a burden, or because it might just simply be too exhausting to actually be honest. You have that 3-minute version. In those years afterwards, there were all these incredible achievements, free climbing the nose, meltdown. And I think a lot about this book is what didn't fit into that 3-minute story. What, especially afterwards, what were you going through in the wake of that experience?
I think that's a great question. This was in 2000. And so back then, there's so much celebration of skirting death, right? It was almost a little bit more celebrated than any physical, achievement or whatnot, because it kind of made for the best stories. And so when we came home, we were greeted by this community that, we all loved and I really identified being a part of. with like congratulatory, sentiments and like amazing, like look at what you guys did, like so you're stronger, you're better for this. So it was very much kind of this like bravado welcoming. And to be fair, back then, I think therapy and trauma in general, like in society as a whole, wasn't very talked about, right? Like growing up, I didn't know adults or kids or anyone that went to therapy that, that was in my life. It was something that was like reserved for, people that went through terrible, horrific things. So therapy and that sort of thing just wasn't very, it just didn't seem like something that was accepted in our community. And so I did start having nightmares pretty immediately, and I felt pretty ashamed of that because I was being told from the outside like how amazing I was and how great this thing was that I went through and how much stronger I'd be because of it. I was pretty ashamed to admit that. So the only people that knew I was having a hard time were my parents and Tommy. And I was still on my parents' insurance at the time. And so, insurance approves like 6 sessions a year at therapy or something like that. And so I went to like 6 sessions to try and help me sleep through the night, which did work. But then after that, I started developing kind of all these like really unhealthy bumpers and ways to live life that I didn't really tell anybody about. I was terrified to be cold because we were, anything that reminded me of Kyrgyzstan. So being cold, we were at 11,000 feet when we were kidnapped, and we didn't have anything like really warm, just like a light jacket and pants. So I was terrified to be cold. I was terrified to be hungry because we didn't have more than, 100 to 200 calories a day. We would like split bars with each other and our captors. And so there's all these things that were happening that I don't think I knew how to process because I just wasn't talking about it with anybody. No one was asking me about it. No one was really saying like, how are you doing? Especially I didn't ever really talk about it with Tommy, which, we ended up getting married and kind of living this like welded life together. But I saw him seemingly fine and seemingly thriving in climbing. So I was like, well, if that's working for Tommy, I should probably just jump on board. And that's what I did. So I kind of jumped on board with just throwing myself into climbing, trying to like bury all these thoughts and fears and worries and whatnot as deep as I could. And, kind of just go with the dialogue that seemed to work.
I'm curious whether you see it this way, but this book, it seems to be very much both about holding on very tight and then also learning to let go. Do you see it that way?
Oh yeah, totally. I feel like my 20s into probably my early 30s, I had this fierce vice grip of control on my life, or I tried to, and, I controlled my eating, my friends, my climbing, my marriage, just like everything, like where I traveled, who I hung out with. And then going through a divorce and then becoming a mom, I feel like that's like everything you need to let go in life, right? Is like those two things will like fast forward that you can't really have a tight vice grip of control on life. And it will just like, zoom that to your forefront and just magnify it completely.
I could not agree more. Yeah. One of the things that struck me while reading the book is that there's this incredible juxtaposition between physical danger and emotional danger. On one side, there's the very real, very traumatic, life-altering experience in Kyrgyzstan. There's also the self-imposed risk of difficult trad climbing on thin gear, way off the ground. And on the other hand, there's also this sense of emotional risk and danger that seems to happen in the part where you fall in love with your now husband, Randy Perot, while you're still married to Tommy. And, this And this might sound strange, but I was one of my favorite parts of the book because when you recounted that feeling of falling in love, I really recognized it. That feeling of being lit up by this other person and just sort of being pulled into it, even though it's scary. And I'm sure in your situation, it must have been pretty terrifying. And I'm curious, at that moment of making that big transition, whether it did feel terrifying or whether you just had this sense of purpose and meaning and you just needed to, or you just knew you needed to do it.
I feel like it was both, right? It was like, it wasn't an either or, it was like an and both type of thing. And I feel like that was one of the first times in my life where I actually recognized that there was space for like two completely conflicting emotions at once, right? Because before that, I was just so segmented. I was like, oh no, like achievement is good. Like thinking about all this other stuff is bad. I will only feel like this one thing. And so I feel like that was kind of the first time in my adult life, at least, that I was like, wow, I am fully enamored with this person and I have all these feelings and they're amazing and wonderful. But then at the same time, I'm so scared and I'm so sad and I'm so devastated, and like all that was just put in a blender, which was myself. And it felt like eternity that time, but it wasn't, in retrospect that long, like a few months or whatnot. And I just remember each day just waking up and being like, I want to just feel like one of them today. It's just like, it's hard, but so human to feel both of them at once. And so it was like kind of like wading through that to find out which one to go and how to pursue that and like how to walk through that messiness that is being a human.
We'll be back after the break. Support for the Diaries comes from Kuat Racks. They've released the Ibex, an overlanding truck bed rack that handles substantial loads both on and off the grid, because we could all use some time off the grid, seriously. Constructed from lightweight yet durable aluminum, the black powder coat is made for all the nature you can throw at it. Available in different frame sizes to accommodate most truck models, the Ibex is engineered for adventure with versatile full and half-height configuration. It's an ecosystem of adventure possibilities. For more details, visit kuat.com. Kuat, because you will absolutely love this bed rack and go dope places. Do you have a resolution to adventure outdoors more this year? Make it happen with Sierra Club Outings. Leaders in conservation-focused, active outdoor adventures, Sierra Club Outings hosts over 250 small group trips every year where you can backpack, kayak, raft, volunteer, and more. These trips fill up fast, so reserve your spot at sierraclub.org/outings and use the code DIRTBAG to get $100 off. With Sierra Club Outings, it's more than just a trip. It's an adventure with a cause. We'll put a link in the show notes. Check out all the incredible trips they have and make that resolution happen. Just about every morning starts the same way for me. Coffee. Piping hot coffee. And with the AeroPress coffee maker, I have a velvety, smooth cup in minutes, which is perfect because, mornings. If you aren't familiar with AeroPress, it's like a French press and an espresso machine had a kid, but it's smaller, more compact, and travels like a boss, so it's easy to take out camping. I remember the first time I used one was in my 20s, and I felt like I just had this incredible cup of coffee from like a Seattle coffee house, but I was out in the middle of nowhere. It was magic. AeroPress has just released a set of clear colors. We're rocking the blue one in our house, but it also comes in green, red, and purple. AeroPress is shockingly affordable, less than $50, and we have an incredible offer for our audience. Visit aeropress.com/diaries. That's AEROPRESS.com/diaries and use the promo code diaries to save 20% off your order. AeroPress ships to the US in over 60 countries around the world, so click the link in the show notes. It helps the show. It's time to ditch the drive-thru on the way to the trailhead and say yes to better mornings fueled by better coffee. Big thanks to AeroPress for sponsoring the show. Certainly, I remember from the early days of your climbing career, the marketers and the media people, they really cast you as this all-American girl or all-American woman. And often throughout the book, you reference that you kind of thought of yourself as a good girl that didn't rock boats. And, I've followed your career for a long time now. And it's interesting because if someone were to ask me, how would you describe Beth now? I would be like, Beth is a person who is the least afraid of being real in our community. Like, she's willing to talk about the hard things, whether that's the pay gap between men and women in sponsorship or disordered eating or mental health issues. And when I think of you, I think of your hard at climbing achievements, but I also think of you as being a true leader who wasn't afraid to say things that no one else was kind of really willing to say. And it seemed like you were unafraid of that difficult conversation. And I realized that might not have been the case for you, because I think it's easy for us to sometimes to look at somebody that we think of as quote unquote brave and just think of them as brave rather than someone who has a complex set of fears and belief, but also has a sense of purpose. And I'm curious, bringing those hard topics up, was that scary for you to do? Because you've done it time and time again.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm like flattered you would say all of that, because I don't know, I never really would label myself a leader or whatnot. But let's see, I feel like, was it scary? Maybe, yeah, at times. I feel like, but maybe not so much in the way that I would think of fear. Not so much of like, oh, what's this going to do for me? But more of like, it just kind of followed along my progression of thinking. And it's like, when you've lived a belief system for so long, slowly unraveling that can be scary, right? And letting in new ways of thinking. And so I feel like if there was fear, and if there is fear, because I feel like, I still do stuff today, that it's probably more like that, like, oh, am I ready to like kind of let go of this thing that was kind of my guiding true north for so long, and is that how I feel? And so, sometimes like when I write about things or I post things or I talk about things, like I'm pretty set in my beliefs, and other times I'm like, I'm feeling this way like today. Will I feel that way tomorrow? I don't know, but sometimes I just go for it anyways. Yeah, and I feel like for me, I couldn't have gotten there if I hadn't kind of gone through that. I don't know if I should call it an aftermath, but kind of like the divorce, all the injuries, all that sort of thing of like, before that, my entire world, like every single thing, was centered around professional climbing and making sure that none of those things kind of rocked the boat, because I was so like, I was just so welded to that, right? Like my identity, my friends, my marriage, just everything. But then once I slowly started to lose that or pull away from that, right? Like when I wasn't married to Tom anymore, when my body wasn't able to be kind of this vehicle that I could use for achievement anymore, when I started to have like normal friends and more normal life, that's when I kind of was able to take a little bit of a step back and be like, wait, why are we celebrating these things that we all kind of have to live by? And why aren't all these other things just as worthy of the celebration? And, once I was kind of able to start to make that shift, that's when I feel like, I was able to start talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Since you sort of broached some of those topics of like equal pay, supporting athletes that want to have children, all those things, have you seen improvements, or have you seen our community respond to some of those conversations? And obviously more people have had them because you started those conversations and it sort of it snowballs, but have you seen improvements?
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like roughly 10 years ago when I started talking about, pregnancy and climbing or wanting to continue my career, it was a pretty taboo subject, right? Like most of the women before me, gracefully bowed out, like did the things they wanted to do and gracefully bowed out of climbing, or, some got dropped by their sponsors or whatnot. And now talking to my younger friends having kids now, it's like, yes, it's still scary because, we don't have 50 years of experience behind us, but it's it would be so uncommon if, something changed for their career. And then as far as mental health, yeah, I see that changing all the time. Like I see it has come leaps and bounds, like therapy. Thank goodness, in a community like ours that experiences so much death and trauma. It's widely talked about now. And, obviously I'm not married to Tommy anymore, so I don't actually have firsthand knowledge of people's pay and that type of thing. But talking to friends who are at the top of the sport now, both male and female, it seems much more equitable than when I was at the top of the sport. So I think everything's coming a very long way. Have we crossed the finish line and checked the box? No, but I feel like it's going in the right direction.
There's this line towards the end of the book, and it says, if someone had told me in my 20s that I would feel more alive being a mom or being in love or having a day out with my girlfriends than I did while I was freeing a route on El Cap, I would have nodded and smiled and walked away thinking that they had no idea what they were talking about. Why would I pursue some normal, boring, run-of-the-mill life when I was seeking and achieving excellence? And in the next paragraph, you say, I finally understand that pursuing greatness didn't fill me the way normal life did. If I wanted to have a big life, I needed to live a smaller one. Talk to me about that paradox of needing to embrace the small life in order to have the big one.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like for, over a decade, I was living the grandiose life dream, right? Like big achievements, big trips, magazine covers, movies, all that sort of thing. But with each one, I always thought I would kind of be filled up more inside, right? With each achievement, I was like, okay, well, this is going to lead to like that little bit more of calm and contentedness or whatever. And each one I was like, huh. And so then I just be like, oh, maybe I just need to dream bigger and do more. And so I do that and that. And each one I was like, oh, something's not happening. And so after that period, of divorce and injuries and all that sort of thing, just actually living this smaller life, like going out to dinner with friends, going to the beach, like actually not climbing, going on a vacation and trying to actually, I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty enjoyable, and so I feel like just those, years afterwards, contrasting them to this really, intense and wonderful and achievement filled, decade prior, it was a pretty good, way for me to see that, oh, maybe I don't need all of that.
Yeah. No, it's so much about that answer made me smile because I feel like I felt like the same way about the beach, especially like in the years where I was like climbing a lot. I was like, why would you ever go to the beach? Like it makes no sense. And I feel like after having kids and you go into the beach, you're like, hey, the beach is not that bad. This is a pretty good deal. Like, and now my kids are always like, yeah, let's go to the beach. I'm like, I'm in. So it's funny. It's like, I feel like that's been a wonderful thing about parenthood that's opened me up to more experiences that cause wonder in children, and then they in turn cause wonder in me and appreciation for them. And I love that. One of the things you brought up there, and I've been thinking about this a lot, just in a bunch of conversations I've been having and what's going on in my life in general, is that I think maybe as we get older, if we're lucky enough, we start to understand that there is a difference between results and success. And like results are like some sort of outcome that generally people would agree is a positive thing, getting a raise at work, climbing a certain grade, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's success. And we actually get to define that. Like we actually get to say, like, what does it mean to have a successful life? And I'm curious from your standpoint, like, what is, for Beth Rodden, like, what is a successful life? Like, could you define it?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I can define it. I feel like I'm just I'm bumbling through life, and just trying my best. But I feel like one thing that has been hugely eye-opening for me just in the past decade or a little bit more is and this is going to sound so, well, of course type of thing, but trying to actually listen to what is okay for me, right? Instead of the outside noise. Because I feel like I always defined success or results or whatnot by outside accolades and what other people were telling me, because I feel like I had placed little value in what I actually believed, so I was kind of like, well, if I do the nose, everybody's going to say that's good, so I'm going to do that. Or if I do a harder grade, everybody else is going to be really impressed, so that's going to make me feel good. Whereas some days now, I'm like, I am exhausted and I'm just totally cooked, and I just need to take today and like literally do nothing, right? Like nobody's going to pat me on the back and be like, good job for doing nothing and like recouping and doing all that sort of thing. But, I'm like, well, that's actually what I need to do. I need to sit on the couch. I'm going to doom scroll for a little while. I'm going to take a nap in the middle of the day, and that's what I'm going to do. So I feel like that's been at least a step in the right direction. But I don't know. I'm only in my mid 40s. I feel like maybe we should ask somebody who's like been lucky enough to live to 90 or 80 or something like that, what they define success by.
Yeah. Well, that leads me into my next question is I had a mentor once like talk to me about like the big picture of life. And I always really appreciate this person's perspective, but they sort of reminded me is like, don't make plans for the future, for your future self. Like, realize that how you think differently and the person you are 10 years from now is going to have different wants and different desires and going to be interested potentially in different things. I mean, maybe not, but there's a good chance that, like if you're starting to plan for the future, you maybe think about doing those things now for this person you are now. And I'm like curious, like when we think about that, as someone who's gone through so much growth, in a really hard, difficult way, how do we make space for the future versions of ourselves?
Gosh, that's a great question. I feel like I'm constantly like telling myself and my family, I'm like, let's just have patience and grace for ourselves, because I feel like we're always changing. I'm always changing, right? Like I said, like in that excerpt that you read, I'm pretty sure that if we had this interview when I was 20, I would be like, wow, I'm so disappointed in my 40-something-year-old self, like I can't believe that's what you're doing with your life. So I think just for me, it's been accepting and learning that it's not only okay, but good to let go of that grip of control, right? Like there's a million ways to go through life that can be enriching and fulfilling and fun and exciting. And so I feel like as a climber and in the climbing community, I was always so convinced that we were doing it right, like somehow we were better than everybody else. But man, there's a million ways out there that people are happy and enjoying life. And like you said, maybe in 10, 20 years, we're just going to be hanging out on the beach. And that's going to be great,
Yeah. We've been in this sport for a long time, and there's sometimes I get sad because I see some of my older friends like give up on it because they can't come to terms with the fact that your skills do diminish. There are more competing things. You can't be excellent to be excellent at climbing, you need to be kind of all in first off. And they will hold themselves up to the standard that is not achievable if you're like a mid-40s parent or a mid-30s parent or whatever it is, right? And I guess, like, do you still love climbing, all these years later? Like, is it still giving you the same amount of joy or maybe even more joy?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I love climbing. I've been sick the past couple days, and I was really sad not to go climbing, and not because I couldn't send some amazing project that's like super hard, but I just kind of, I love climbing. And I think I'm just like you. I've seen so many of my peers, like once you can't push the level of the sport forward anymore, once you're, climbing many levels below what you used to, it's hard for them to stay in it, and so they stopped climbing. And, I totally went through that period for a few years. Climbing was causing me more anguish, than joy. And I really started to question whether I should stay in it. And I kind of had to redefine my relationship with it. And I'm definitely not performing like I used to, but I feel like I have so much more joy in it, than I feel like I'm probably like back, if it was a bell curve or whatnot, I'm like kind of near when you first start and you're just like, oh, this is so fun. Like, I don't care what I go climb. I just want to go climb. So I'm kind of like back on that side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it feels, someone asked me like, are you still climbing? And I kind of was like, I almost started to answer no, because like if you look on a paper, like I think what they think of like, are you still climbing? I'd be like, no, I'm not still doing what I used to do. I'm not still like, that's not the case. But then I thought about it and I was like, you're still climbing probably 150 days a year, and it's like, it's just different. For me, it's like I steal an hour and 20 minutes at the gym and I'm like freaking psyched and I'm not good, but like I derive so much joy out of the movement. And then when I do go climbing outside, it's I get some days to myself out there, but I don't even really care about that. It's mostly I'm psyched to get the boys out climbing. Those are the best days for me. And it's so funny because like they're starting to belay me and stuff, and I'm kind of like even in solo mode half the time where I'm like, I cannot fall here because I've got like an 80-pound kid belaying me right now. And
totally.
I have a blast doing it. And it was so funny because I started to say, well, I'm not really climbing anymore. And I was like, no, what are you talking about? You're totally climbing. It's just you're authoring it in this different, wonderful way. And I corrected myself and I was able to share that. And it was just illuminating to me because I was like, oh no, I've stuck with this in a way that it still gives me joy. And that's what I was in for it in the beginning, that's what I was just seeking, is I wanted a life where I could have all these feelings. And there may be different feelings, like there's less fear involved, I would say, or like less sort of like determination and more just like, man, this is a beautiful day out at Index, Washington, and this is a good time. So yeah, I don't know. I'm glad I got to that space. I'm glad you got to that space too.
Yeah, I feel super lucky, honestly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, congrats again on the book. I know it was a long time coming and going from there. And, thanks so much for sitting down to chat about it and share this with us. So I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Yeah, I'm super, super honored.
Thank you, Beth, for sharing your story with us. Beth's book, A Light Through the Cracks, is out now, and we have a link in the show notes to it. I highly suggest you check it out. It's an incredible story. Our stories come from friends of friends, and from you, our community. If you have a compelling idea for a guest or a story lead, please give us a shout. You can use the submission form on our website, dirtbagdiaries.com. Music today from Jesse Siebenberg and Brennan O'Connell. The tracks are courtesy of the Artists Track Club or Free Music Archive. Jacob Bain and Nis Cotto composed our theme song. You can find the links to the artists on our website. This episode was produced by me, Fitz Cahall, with editing by Lauren Delani Miller. Becca Cahall is our executive producer. I'm Fitz Cahall, and you've been listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. Thanks for tuning in.